Welcome to a new daily top AskReddit video. Today's topic.
What's one historical fact that they won't teach you in school? The poetry written by Chinese warlord, Zhang Zongchang. You tell me to do this. He tells me to do that. You're all bastards, go fuck your mother. After seeing a basketball game for the first time, he allegedly asked, why the hell are they fighting over a single ball? We're the hosts. Are we seriously this poor? He ordered all the players be given a basketball. Quote. Japanese WW2 war crimes are seldom discussed in detail. When I was in school, my French teacher decided to ditch the whole teaching us French thing one day and spent the entire lesson talking about his father's experience in a Japanese POW camp and the atrocities he'd witnessed. Think it was an anniversary day or something, as wasn't relevant to a bunch of British kids doing French otherwise. One of the most memorable lessons I ever had though. My grandfather was a psychiatrist for the British Navy as the war was wrapping up and treated many POWs held by Japan. He was pretty fucked up about it and did not care for the Japanese. I live in Canada, and whenever they talked about the Japanese they almost always talked about the atomic bombs and Pearl Harbor. They never went into any details whatsoever. TBF WW2 is a huge subject that could be, and I'm sure some places is, a whole semester-long class on its own. Hell, just the Pacific Theater after Pearl Harbor could be its own class. It makes sense they would just hit the two big events. Went to a British school in Asia. They glossed over the Opium Wars. They gloss over that in Britain too. In China they actually call that period of time the century of humiliation. So yeah, they probably aren't hot on discussing it. East Asian countries keep such intense names for these time periods, aptly, IMO. Meanwhile Britain has the troubles. The circumstances surrounding the death of Meriwether Lewis, of Lewis and Clark, are shrouded in conspiracy. In the months leading up to his death many people reported that Lewis had become paranoid, claiming that he was being followed and that his life was in danger. In a desperate attempt for help, he sent a letter to his close friend, and then President Thomas Jefferson, to request an audience. While traveling along the Natchez Trace, he stayed a night at an inn. During the night, the owner reported hearing multiple gunshots but never went out to check on the source. In the morning, Lewis was found dead in his cabin, sitting against the wall looking at the door, rifle in hand and shot in the back. In addition, while the room was ransacked, the only missing objects of note were Lewis' riding back and personal documents. After an official investigation, his death was ruled a suicide and all further inquiry into the instance have been barred by the US government. While Lewis himself did not have any immediate descendants, his extended family have submitted requests every year to have his body exhumed in order to confirm the cause of death. To this day their requests have unanimously been denied. The constant ingestion of mercury-based laxatives probably really didn't help in the paranoia department. They've gone back and tracked the exact route of the Lewis and Clark trail by looking for mercury in the soil from their excrement. It was that bad. Interesting. If it was a homicide, I wonder who would have had it out for him. Would it have been a robbery or was it something more sinister? So, that is a fascinating line of questioning. It's important to understand what happened to Lewis after the expedition. As a reward, he was granted governorship of the Louisiana Territory and settled in St. Louis. A major part of Lewis' policies revolved around the integration of native tribes into the Union and recognizing each as their own independent nations within the United States. As part of this, he was a huge advocate for upholding the treaties and respecting native lands. At the time this was not a particularly popular stance and it led Lewis to butt heads with his territorial secretary, Frederick Bates. Without going into too much detail, Bates basically did everything he could to work against Lewis in an attempt to make the man seem unqualified for his role as governor. It was during this time that Bates allegedly started to spread the rumor that Lewis was addicted to alcohol and opiates, leading everyone to ignore his statements that there were people plotting against him. The running theory is that Bates may have hired a hitman to attempt to kill Lewis and then take over the role of governor following his death. The CIA deposed or destabilized many democratically elected leaders to install leaders who were more friendly to us, read, us business, policies, causing enormous loss of life and suffering all over the world. Operation Condor targeted South America, resulted in about 30,000 to 60,000 deaths and affected Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, Paraguay, Peru and Uruguay. This was straight-up state terrorism and destroyed democracy in South America during the 20th century. I'm Still Here, Oscars 2025 nominee for Best International Film, is a story about a family during this time period in Brazil, and one of the million stories of pain and suffering caused by this American influence. Also, I'm a firm believer that if Trump won the 2020 election we would have had another coup here in Brazil in 2022, together with a couple failed coup attempts that happened in South America. Back in the 19th century, small opposition newspapers in the Netherlands were called Lilliputters, equals midgets, because of their small size, which was a way to avoid having to pay for the newspaper stamp. The best example of this are the papers published by the fanatical Republican Eilert Meter, who received imprisonment for lèse-majesté, before being invited to meet King William II in person, who offered him an allowance if he ceased publicizing. Meter later went back to publishing anyway, but admitted in his writings that he found the king a kind and friendly person, he was just opposed to having a king. Okay, you simply do not learn this in school because it is obscure and relatively unimportant. But still, OMG, in my country Lilliput is used as a term of endearment towards a shorter family member or friend. I never knew why, this is amazing. Thank you. I wonder if both are related to Gulliver's Travels, by Jonathan Swift. In it Lilliput is the home of the miniature Lilliputians. Benjamin Franklin really liked to fuck old ladies. Well, he's almost 320 years old, so they're age appropriate for him. This is not accurate. Ben Franklin liked to scandalize people through writing. We think of him as a salacious old man not through his actions, but through his texts, which were self-aggrandizing but also not always meant to be taken seriously. It's definitely true he had at least a couple of affairs while in a loveless partnership with his wife. But the period where his reputation as a horndog flourished was as ambassador in France was in a reality a 70-year-old man laid up with gout, meticulously trying to cultivate a youthful and fun vigor for the benefit of his hosts. Citation appreciated. I borderline believed this too, even though I knew that most historical legends of salacious nature are usually fabricated for propagandic aims. Let's just say, George Washington's teeth weren't made of wood. Were they bones from dead people? Horse teeth. Sewn. They were the teeth of the enslaved. Washington took his slaves to Philadelphia when he was president. But PA had a law that, after 6 months, an enslaved person was free. So Washington would work his slaves for just short of 6 months before sending them back to Virginia to avoid freeing them. Just like how places today will make sure to only schedule you for 38 hours so that they don't have to give you full-time benefits except, maybe a little worse. I was 28 when I learned about the Tulsa Massacre. If you dig a little deeper, you'll find similar events in a lot of southern states. The localities were smaller and less people were involved, but the incidents involved murdering whole communities of black families. Oftentimes, this was done with the support of local and state governments. I am in my 60s and still learning about these atrocities. Not just blacks but Asians too. Anywhere the KKK flourished there was trouble for non-male, non-whites. Fun, true fact, in 1518, the city of Strasbourg, then part of the Holy Roman Empire, experienced a bizarre, dancing plague, where dozens of people danced uncontrollably for days, some reportedly dancing to death. Historians believe it might have been caused by mass hysteria, ergot poisoning, a hallucinogenic fungus on rye, or even a psychological response to stress. Ergot is unlikely for that one, because ergotism causes a range of distressing physical symptoms, not just hallucinations. People would have noticed the blisters and gangrene. Yes, ergot contains a chemical precursor to LSD. But LSD has a lot less of the vasoconstrictive effects and more of the hallucinogenic ones. Closing parenthesis. This is only one of dozens of dancing manias recorded in European history. It is a fascinating topic. And they say white people can't dance. Ha! The guys defending the Alamo were the bad guys. Texas was Mexico at the time. To attract settlers to the land, Mexico allowed American farmers to move there and bring their enslaved workers with them. Slavery was not something Mexico was crazy about and soon banned slavery in the entire country except for Texas. A few years later, they tried to ban it in Texas. That's when the Texas Revolution started. The Texans were fighting to keep slavery, not for freedom from an oppressive government. Not everyone at the Alamo died. The enslaved workers were spared and are largely the reason we know what happened. If you visit the Alamo today, or at least when I did in 2022, most of the information is left out of the booklet and signage. It does mention the enslaved workers by name, but that's about it. Fighting to preserve slavery isn't the narrative they want to display today. I remember learning about the Alamo in school and slavery wasn't mentioned. And then how absent it was from the actual site. If I had a nickel for every time Texas rebelled to keep slavery, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's strange that Texas schools intentionally censor this. Texas is in a country that is also trying to rewrite the history of slavery in the Confederacy, so it's not a surprise at this point. Went to Galveston to visit one of the older houses of an influential person back in its early days. They talked about the great boom of the economy that he brought through his cotton business. Pretty much left out the slave part. Much about Welsh history at all really beyond a few bullet points. Welsh history is fabulously rich and storied. Can you recommend any books on Welsh history? Oh golly, most of my knowledge has been collected scattershot over my lifetime, so I'm not sure on one book. I have read a few on the culture and the Sitch of Wales, the Mabinogion of course, and Rape of the Fair Country, How Green Is My Valley also. But those aren't historical. Depends what you want really, Celtic, petty kingdoms, Welsh princes, rebellions, or modern history. Texas and Macmillan books removed important Native American history like Trail of Tears from their textbooks. I had a classmate freshman year of high school who had the Texas version of our history textbook and it didn't include evolution. Wouldn't that be more likely to be in a science book rather than history? I went to school on TX and learned about it in biology, I think.